Between the two of them, Brittney Cosby and Crystal Jackson didn't seem to have an enemy in the world. Which begs the questions, who would want them dead and why?
Two young women found murdered. One shot in the head, the other beaten to death, her face covered with a bedsheet.
It was a pretty gruesome sight.
Their bodies had been mercilessly dumped in Port Bolivar, Galveston County, but investigators believe the murders happened elsewhere. Detectives scrutinized the scene, finding 3 blood-spattered wood boards in a blood-stained envelope. On that envelope, an address, Houcher Street in Houston, and a name, Brittney Cosby. At the Houston address, investigators informed Brittney's 90-year-old great-grandmother, Annie Lee Cosby, and her father, James Cosby, of her tragic demise.
What happened?
That's what we're trying to find out.
James, I know we're hitting you with a lot. Take a minute, but we're going to really need to talk to you so you can help us so we can find out who did this, okay?
What happened?
You grieve all you need to grieve, we understand.
And they quickly learned the other woman's identity.
Who was the girl with it?
That's her girlfriend, that Crystal.
What kind of vehicle do they have?
It's a Kia.
A Kia.
It's a Kia. It's a Kia SUV.
That night, Crystal's parents called everywhere trying to find her. Unfortunately, their worst fears were soon confirmed.
Hearing those words, that Crystal's gone.
It was a devastating blow, and there's just no other words could describe how we felt.
Complete heartbreak, not only for them, but for Crystal's 5-year-old daughter, Zanaya. Brittney's mother, Loranda McDonald, found out on social media.
My sister then was going through Facebook, and it had on there, R.I.P. Brittney. And then she was like, is Brittney dead? And I said, don't tell me that, please don't tell me that. I didn't even want to let my mama. That hurt right bad. That was my only girl.
Investigators working around the clock caught a much-needed break. A man found a wallet on a dirt road and notified the sheriff's department.
A gentleman was walking his dog and found this wallet, mailed it back, and then later realized that the name on the driver's license was one of the missing females.
It was Brittney's. Investigators theorized that the dirt road close to Brittney's house may have been the first intended dump site. 2 days later, they talked again with Brittney's father, James Cosby, hoping to clarify the timeline.
You told me last you saw Brittney was a Wednesday night?
No.
Thursday morning?
Yeah.
What time did Crystal and Brittney leave?
The same time they usually leave every morning. It was like just a normal morning. Nothing was out of the ordinary.
But detectives were puzzled. Why did the women leave that morning without taking Crystal's daughter, Zanaya, to school?
That's the one thing that's out of the ordinary that we're trying to figure out. That's because if normally they would take her to school, but yet they left her there that morning. No, man, I know you're doing the best you can. And as things come up, you know you got my number, so you call anytime.
Detectives believed one of the keys to finding Brittney and Crystal's killer was finding their SUV. They pulled surveillance videos from a couple of key locations. First, the liquor store near the house.
We were able to get surveillance video from the liquor store that showed that vehicle leaving early that morning, which is when we think the homicide first occurred. We also were able to find it leaving that evening on the way to Galveston.
Then, surveillance video from the Galveston ferry landing. On the tape, visual proof that around 9 p.m. that night, a man was stopped by ferry security in an SUV believed to match the lady's Kia Sorento.
He was approached by the security officer who told him that the headlight was out on the vehicle. At that time, he exited the vehicle, came around to the front, examining the light.
Investigators believe Brittney and Crystal's bodies were in the back of that SUV at the time, but the driver sets off no alarms.
If that gentleman would have looked in the back of that car, he would have saw the 2 bodies.
But the guard does offer up a strong description, leading to a composite sketch. Was this their killer? 6 days after Brittney and Crystal were murdered, an absolute game changer. A fingerprint found at the site where the bodies were dumped comes back with a match. The results? Enough to shock everyone. That lone fingerprint is a perfect match to Brittney's own dad.
I called Detective Kitchens and I was like, I told him, I said, this is the fingerprint I have. "It's James Cosby, who is that?" And he said, "That's the father. That's Brittney's dad."
It was a stunning realization. The man detectives had only seen as the grieving father was now their prime suspect. When investigators returned to the home, James wasn't there, but his grandmother's caregiver shared some valuable information.
She described a lot of things that were different in the house and outside the house.
With a search warrant in hand, investigators bring the forensics team to the house. At the same moment, just blocks away, a vigil is underway to grieve the two women.
You can't really put something like this into words.
Friends, family, and grieving father James Cosby gathered at a candlelight vigil to remember Brittney and Crystal. Captured here by local news.
Brittney's a good child. She's my baby.
Little did James know what was going on back at the home. Outside, under the carport, blood spots and a missing shutter, which matched one found with the bodies.
His bedroom is adjacent to that carport. On the outside of this house, there was false shutters that were on the main windows, which one was missing. That shutter was found in Bolivar with the bodies.
Just inside the door, in the den where James slept, signs of a bloodbath.
Everywhere we were looking, we were finding something with blood on it. Tiny drops, bigger drops, pools, swipe marks. They were in the door, they were on the carpet, on the couch, on clothes that were in the room.
And when we talk about amount, you're talking massive.
Yes, ma'am. At her autopsy, her body was just about empty of her blood, so she bled out in that room.
And when investigators sprayed the room with chemicals to detect human blood invisible to the naked eye, the room lit up like a 4th of July sky.
He tried to clean it up.
He tried. He put smaller rugs on top of the blood stains, which, that's not gonna do it.
Detectives also uncovered a box of bullets with a mix of .38 and .357 shells. They believed the murder weapon was a .357, and the bullet which killed Crystal was a .38.
This is the most evidence I've ever collected on a crime scene.
How much?
307 individual pieces. And 290 of them said it was James Cosby that committed the crime.
Back at the vigil, James Cosby pleads for the public's help in finding the killer.
We need to find out what's happening. The detectives are doing what they do. They've been keeping us informed as much as they can, but, there's nothing yet.
But Cosby had no clue there definitely was something. And though the vigil was coming to an end, the questions were just beginning for James Cosby.
They ended up picking him up was at the vigil. This is not looking good for Mr. Cosby.
Based on all the evidence collected, detectives deduced that sometime in the early morning hours, as Crystal's daughter sat in the car waiting to be taken to school, James got into a fight with Brittney, savagely beating her to death. They believed Crystal walked in while it was happening, and he shot her. Zanaya wandered back into the house from the car, staying with the dead women for hours. James Cosby then spent the day with his girlfriend. And at some point, James put Brittney and Crystal in the back of their own SUV and drove to Port Bolivar, where he dumped their bodies.
Tried to cover it up.
Do you think he thought he got away with it?
I think he was believing he was headed that way.
Coming up,
It's your daughter!
an interrogation straight out of a whodunit detective crime novel.
Can you explain to me how your print wound up on some of that over there where those bodies were recovered in Port Bolivar, Texas?
My print was on what?